Hi everyone. We're going to have a look at the different types of earth energies in this presentation that are found at various different ancient sites in England and compare them to other sites around the world. There have been some really famous dowsers in history. I'm going to talk about a Chinese emperor that was a diviner of the land in a moment. But in history there has been Einstein was a dowser, Newton was a dowser, Da Vinci and Himmler. They were all very good at dowsing. But in England, when all the ancient sites were being integrated with earth energies and lined upon energy currents and lines, nobody wrote anything down. Our ancient ancestors were quite bardic, but they were writing down contemporary with the times of Avebury and Stonehenge in ancient China. And here is one of the first diviners that was written about. He was the emperor in 2200 BC, and Avebury and Stonehenge in their heyday were about 2500 BC, if we're to believe the orthodox timeline. And a ruler of the land meant you had to interact with the earth energies, be responsible for fertility, and be responsible for the energetic quality in temple spaces and things. So the ancient rulers of China weren't just emperors and dictators of, law. They were also responsible for the land. And I think that's what our Neolithic queen at Stonehenge was. I think she was a really top geomancer, just like her Chinese equivalent. Now, he's holding a very unusual dowsing instrument, and that was said to be able to pick up on water and earth energies, and he would align temple spaces upon them. And he would align the temple spaces so that they would irrigate the land of China. I've had the good fortune in my life to be taught by two Chinese geomants, really lovely, genuine people. And they told me long ago, about 2 decades, if not more ago, that ancient Peking, modern-day Beijing, was sited under a massive amount of underground water, which we're going to have a look at particular types of underground water in a moment. And Peking was sited upon this because it would generate money. That's where we get the term currency from, the current of underground water, and Chinese associate water with fish, and it's about wealth as well. And they always said that, and they said it's massive, and particular moon cycles allow the underground water to move and to flow in harmony with the cycles of the moon. And it wasn't until about 2003, reported in New Scientist magazine, that the largest sea underneath the Earth is underneath Peking. So our ancient ancestors looked for certain areas, as did the Masons actually. The city of London, which is an independent country, is sited under a huge amount of underground water. Again, you've got the wealth and the term currency evolved from that. So the ancient Chinese were fully aware of the power of water because they thought that, Gaia isn't solid. Not really. If we look at her landmass, 75% of that is water, isn't it? The oceans. We're 75% water. And it's believed by esoteric water diviners that 75% of the inner earth is water. And this type of water isn't like little streams. I mean, that's what we kind of bore down in the water table. When you go down deep into the center of the earth, going down, say, much deeper than a normal well, then you may hit upon primary water or yin water that is born deep within the earth, independent of rainfall. It's that particular type of water that has immense power. And it was called primary water by the military. So I really like the term yin water more than primary water. And this water generates a magnetic field that is absolutely immense. And when we have a look at what underground water can look like, way down in the earth, you're talking about a lot of tunnels that are like rivers flowing, meeting seas underground. And it's now believed that these underground water systems have their own weather patterns deep within the earth. And all of this is energy, massive amount of energy. Just imagine that you're waiting for the bath to run and you push on the taps full blast. That water coming down creates energy and it will splash things up. This creates an electromagnetic field that can be recorded that emits a high hertz frequency that will bring your brain into a kind of relaxed mode, around about 7 to 10 hertz. But this is the energy pattern that it emits. It has a central spiral surrounded by a circle and surrounded by a horseshoe shape. And that's the threefold energy pattern of underground water that is primary water and sacred. And it's very unusual at sacred sites to find that horseshoe pattern. To the best of my knowledge, in Dowsing, what this is called the Geodesic system of earth energies, described by Guy Underwood in his findings. There's hardly any. I mean, Stonehenge does. That's the one side. But you can't find that at Avebury. You only find the geospiral and the circular pattern. You start to go further afield to other islands like Sardinia or Malta, and you start to see the triple effect of this pattern. But you know what? Dowsing's changed over the years. Round about the kind of 1980s, dowsing changed. And it became, your mind got involved in it. So what a lot of dowsers do these days, for example, is they use what's called the show me technique. And the show me technique is you hold a dowsing rod, and you can say to the dowsing rod, show me the nearest ley line, show me the nearest underground water, show me the nearest grid line. Your mind is interacting with the process of dowsing. That's not how dowsing was really done prior to 1988. Prior to that, how you used to dowse was you used to interact with your body. The left side of the body was considered more female, and the right, so you'd use different hands for different types of energy dowsing, and you'd program your rod to your body. That's how master dowsers dowse before 1980. For example, so Guy Underwood was one of those traditional master dowsers. So you interact with the earth energy through your body. That is very, very important because it's not just your mind as we use today. And I teach both methods. I think, you know, the show me technique is very good. But what Chinese geomants point out about British dowsers is this. Well, when you use the show me technique and you're interacting with your mind and your ego with the earth energy, I've noticed that some dowsers would say, for me, the energy is here. For me, the energy is over here. So it's mental. And some people, the Chinese geomants say, but it can't be over there and there. Why aren't you using your body to understand about the earth? Guy did that, and he realized that, for example, underground yang water, that's the water that falls from the sky, it fills up the water table, will give off a frequency that affects the left-hand side of the body. So instead of using the show me technique when you're at an ancient site, somebody's house or a manor house or for space clearing, whatever, you would hold a rod in this hand, and the reaction, you instantly know what the energy is because only certain energies affect different sides of the body. So that's how dowsing used to be done. And also with pendulum dowsing, it became very fashionable in the late 80s to use a short pendulum to find different things. Whereas before, with master dowsers like Tom Lethbridge, you'd have to know the rate of something. A bit like an old chemist or alchemist would know the symbol of gold and silver. You'd have to know the rate of different vibrations of different minerals and like underground water. And you'd use the right chord length on a pendulum to find different things. And then you program your pendulum with your body to find out where in your body that influence is felt. But all of that became very unfashionable in the 80s, and the mind got involved. And I think, in a way, that's put dowsing back a little bit. And I was really fortunate because my dad inherited all the unpublished surveys by Guy Underwood. And Guy Underwood looked into water energy, and he was fascinated by water energy. And he rediscovered these ancient patterns that the Chinese instantly recognized. They call them sheng-qi. It's positive energy. And they say anything in a horseshoe is really protective. It will protect the emperor, it will protect your house, it protects an ancient site. And they notice that chickens in the wild and ducks in the wild, they tend to rest on this energy pattern, and then they won't get attacked by foxes and things like that. It's the natural order. Animals know what's good for them, and they find it. I'm sure some sites in ancient America, and I've got a side of here, this is said to be a bear print. and that's what the ancient site was based on. I think it's based on the protective symbol of underground water. And according to John Michel, in his writings in the New View of Atlantis, he claims that 1080 is a very, very sacred number, and it's the number that rules underground water compared to the solar force of 666. But the Chinese don't see it like we do. We see things in polarity, like Mary and Michael. In China, they say it isn't. It's one force and two expressions. So inside the expression of Mary, as Hamish would see it, is Michael. That's how they see it, and vice versa. So they don't make things into polarity. And the wonderful thing is about these type of energies, they interact with the stones sited upon them. So place standing stones on the geospiral figure at the center, the primary halo circle that surrounds it, or the horseshoe, and it becomes alive. It becomes imbued with earth energy. And that earth energy is now changing. It's coming from the water deep below the ground, and it's going up through the stone, and then it will be eventually transmitted in an aerial form of electromagnetic energy. And the moon dictates the times of the month when stone circles become alive with water energy. And Guy Underwood noticed that in this latitude, at least, that would happen 6 days after a new and full moon. Not the new and full moon, but specifically 6 days. Our ancient Druid ancestors would only pick mistletoe 6 days after a new moon. In fact, the year began 6 days after the full moon at the spring equinox. So our ancient Druid, the masters of nature, if you will, were very aware of this system of earth energy. In fact, a lot of hill forts are designed around this pattern. And so when we look at stones that are sited on the crossing points of underground yin water like this, it generates a lot of energy. And the heel stone at Stonehenge is sited upon an energy pattern of underground water. So if you feel the stone in particular areas of it, obviously you can't touch the stones at Stonehenge because they really don't want you to interact with the ancient past, but it will pulse out 6 days after a new or full moon. And even if you put your body close to it, you feel the energy move. And in fact, Guy Underwood said the whole of Stonehenge was designed on this ancient principle of deep underground yin water, because a really vast source of underground water, like underneath modern-day Beijing, has a tidal force, yeah? It's like the seas of the surface. And he said every single circular pattern at Stonehenge was designed on this energy system. And this energy system comes alive at the moon. And that's why I think when we looked at the elongated skull, that High Queen of Stonehenge, I think that's why Stonehenge was originally a lunar monument. It was all about harnessing these types of energies in a long-lost technology. So what I did, I suppose I spent a long time dowsing with my father, and there was one enigma in the geodesic system of earth energies, an aquastat. Guy Underwood constantly said these were sacred. They were sacred to nature. They were sacred to Gaia. Your body on the right-hand side instantly reacts and will get pulled and drawn to aquastat energy, whereas normal rainwater from the water table, you get pulled on your left-hand side, for example. But he didn't know what it was. He thought it was fissure systems, and he did this amazing survey of Stonehenge. He went there for 200 visits, and he did the lunar cycle over 3 years looking into this type of energy. And what he found was it starts to pulsate through these aquastats. And he did this survey right on the avenue. And when Michael Parker Pearson with the Riverside Project dug it, it did show the fissure systems that Guy Underwood was talking about. He was a very, very good master dowser. And what these aquastats are, I had one of those eureka moments after working a lot with the Underwood papers. And I thought, well, aqua really does imply water. We know that water behaves in a particular way. When we look at rainwater, it always emits this type of what's called a stream band. You have 3 lines, and that's where the underground water is. And it's been known ever since 1899 by a fantastic water diviner called Tompkins, that in rock situation, this is a rock cavern, you get the chevron pattern. Water will start moving in a chevron, and a lot of the beaker pots of the Bronze Age all have that chevron pattern. And that is masculine water. Now, when he started describing aquastats, he said it is about 12 lines, like a zodiacal force of energy. So you get these 12 really strong energy lines above an aquastat. And what I think an aquastat is, it's the feminine water rising close to the surface and producing a different energy pattern. And I think that's what Guy Underwood was alluding to. So geological influences change the nature of underground water. For example, in Wiltshire, where Stonehenge is, and where you have Avebury, it's underneath chalk, and chalk can emit its own kind of slight electromagnetic field, and combine that with this type of energy, and you have more of a better force of Gaia's immense energy system. Now, aquastats and all of this are influenced by those lunar cycles, 6 days. But what an aquastat does, it literally expands around that time, and then it will start to contract. And at the time of eclipses, everything goes really, really quiet. It's like the whole energy system. Gaia takes a rest with an eclipse, and it's very difficult to pick up on Earth energies. And then, just after an eclipse, and there was great experiments done in, I think it was 1999 or year 2000, when we had a total eclipse. There was loads of people in Cornwall dowsing on a really big eclipse project to see the nature of aquastats, water, and earth currents, like Hamish Miller's Mary and Michael lines, for example. So everything goes really, really quiet at that time. And if you're using an energy system, you would really want to know the times of the eclipses so that you could manipulate and control it to a certain degree. And again, we see that at Stonehenge. If you look at the Gerald Hawkins model of Stonehenge, he says it's an eclipse predictor. And the heel stone is sited on one of the most powerful parts of an underground cavern water system. And Stonehenge is unique in terms of the world. It really is not in just its iconic form, but where it's placed, because where it's placed is where all the underground water really rushes through the ground. And when underground water rushes through the ground, it creates a particular fast-flowing energy pattern. And it's often a triad form, like in B, and different prehistoric cultures sort out these different energies. So everything flowing towards Stonehenge is fast flowing, and which makes me think, again, phase 1 may not have necessarily been about people, but about trying to do a powerhouse there. And it was the elongated people that chose the centre of Stonehenge, long, long before Stonehenge was built in the Bronze Age in the iconic stone manner that we can become familiar with it today. So all of the energy currents leading into Stonehenge in terms of underground water energies are flowing at an incredible speed into Stonehenge, and they gather at 2 places. One's around the heel stone and one's just off from the altar stone. They're the 2 major power places. And it's interesting to note that in terms of energy, the blue stones, which are the smaller stones at Stonehenge that were once in a circular form in phase 1, and again in a circular form in phase 2, and an oval in phase 2, are 3 times more magnetic than any other stone, and they're sited on those circular primary halo areas. We mentioned the Cursus monument yesterday as well, didn't we? We had a look at the huge, it went on for 1.75 miles. And this is the Cursus photograph of where it lies in the landscape. And wherever you have underground water, around September, October, and November, you will see mist, just like you do on a river. Underground water will make the soil moist, and this is a photograph of exactly where the Cursus is, which Guy Underwood said is a river. It doesn't flow it moves, meanders away from it, but most of the Cursus is above this massive underground river. Just in the near center is where you get a huge release of gamma radiation. And this was clearly very, very important to our ancient ancestors to create these monuments above the underground water. Many years ago, I mean, we're not far in Glastonbury from Longleat, are we? It's a safari park and a manor house owned by the Thinns, Alexander Thynn or Lord Bath. Now, in his property, he's had it divined numerous times because the gentry are very aware of earth energies, and they're very aware of a particular pattern called habitation spirals. And a habitation spiral, if you imagine there's an underground stream and then a pocket of water creates a spiral energy pattern. So you have a meandering line that gives off spirals. They're like all underground pockets of water. That's said to really be beneficial for your health. It's supposed to give you a long life. It's supposed to help your immune system in many ways. So what the medieval masons were doing, they were siting a lot of the manor houses on these habitation spirals, just like we'll have a look at in a moment. The ancient ancestors were looking for those. And it's said to preserve skin, it's said to preserve bone, it's said to emit a beautiful spiritual gold colour that can, like alchemy, change the nature of a disease and bring the disease through fast so that you go through healing. And Alexander Thynn wanted to get planning permission to have on his Longleat estate a massive replica of Stonehenge. But unfortunately, the Wiltshire County Council wouldn't allow him planning permission. And he was saying that his family home was built on these habitation spirals. And we must remember that the early medieval masons weren't just in charge of building manor houses and churches, but they were in charge of the fertility of the land. All of the barns were under Masonic rulership where they were placed in the landscape. Because if you place a barn or animals or people above these energy patterns, then you're going to enhance their life. And it's really very important. And this is why I think the Neolithic people around Stonehenge and this area, this is Stony Littleton Long Barrow. It's a wonderful barrow that is on completely above these habitation types of spirals, which I'll be going to in June. This must have been for the land of the living. Its primary use, I feel very strongly, it had nothing to do with death. It was only when they were being decommissioned in their final phase that I think the skeletons and the long bones and some vertebrae went inside them. And yesterday I mentioned the antiquarian that went round, we could call it ransacking the long barrows, and the myth was he was looking for the Neolithic king. Not like Arthur, but a Neolithic king was supposed to have been buried in the Stonehenge environs. I think that's what he was looking for, and he just came across the Queen. But Sir Richard Coe-Orr, he did all of the excavations around Stonehenge. And what he did, he noticed one particular round barrow was really perfect looking. It hadn't been so excavated, and he thought that's why it didn't have a dip in the top, and he was quite intrigued. So he ordered his workmen to instantly take the top off, slice the top off it, and get to the ancient Britain at the bottom. And the workmen did that, and he was with William Cunnington, who did a lot of the work, excavation work there, and they did find a skull and some long bones, very unusual to have in a round barrow. They would tend to be like cremation urns, were quite often placed in them, although you often did have a primary burial. Anyway, he was really aghast because he said, I can see hair on the skull, and he noticed as well that the teeth were as white as snow and the cheeks were very perfect. It looked a perfect skull. Well, he was like overwhelmed by this, so he said to his workman, I want that skull smashed. So the workman, one of the workmen, got the big, sledgehammer type thing, and he went to smash the skull, and it didn't break first time. And that's because Guy Underwood went there and found it was above habitation spirals. It will give strength to the body and to the mind alike. So when we interact with these types of energies, when we go to a sacred site, we can feel them in our bodies, we can divine them with dowsing rods. They really do affect our consciousness. And I see the future as being quite beautiful in England, in Austria, and in Romania at the moment, because these are the countries that are really saying for future builds, we want to put on places of our schools and our hospitals on habitation lines. And they want to get rid of the old energies. And these are this is the top people in Austria are really thinking about earth energy. It's a new generation coming along, and they want to live in harmony with the earth once more. So interacting with these different types of energies can really prolong our lives and heal us on many levels. I've had a minor op recently, and I had to have 2 weeks downtime to get over the operation. And what happened was I started interacting with these energies, and I take essences with them, and I feel it really does enhance the healing process, and it's free. And our ancient ancestors were fully aware of the beauty in the earth, the energy points in the earth, where they were, and they sighted things on them. The lays are a different manner. They can transmit the energy, and that's how it's seen in China. Now, to esoteric water diviners, we all know about the chakra system, don't we? And we've got a base chakra that is said to have a colour of red, and my throat chakra is the colour of blue. To esoteric water diviners, the land and your body, your chakra system, is all the colours of the earth. But one colour helps and is dominant in the opening of a chakra. So they would see, for example, the base chakra being the multitude of earth colours, and there are 12 earth colours, for example. And that would help with opening that. And they say the most strongest form of earth energy known to man is called negative green. You have an Egyptian dowser who is very aware and very good. He makes a lot of products. He's studied negative green since the French diviners first discovered it. And they realized that just like the light of the sun has a spectrum of color, the earth has a spectrum of color as well. And that these colors are always associated with earth energy. And you can do a wonderful experiment where you just place a wooden construct with a pendulum, you put it to a direction, and a color will always be chosen. It's constant, so that can be repeated. There was two, and this was done by French diviners in the 1930s, and one was really fascinated by negative green, and he wanted to create a device that would enhance it and enhance it and enhance it, and he did. And he was in his laboratory making all of the notes of negative green because he thought it would be free energy for us all to use, and it would be no pollution because it's from Gaia. But unfortunately, he amplified it a little bit too much, and he was found mummified in his laboratory. It's gone down in dowsing law. And a few sites in England have negative green associated with them, and one of which is the Rollright stones in Oxfordshire. And it has an outlier stone called the King's Stone. I don't know if any of you have been there, but you have this really big stone, and to the side of it, you have a big patch of negative green. And negative green is just like a very small fist size, but it's said to come out of the land and shower you. So our ancient ancestors, if they were aware of the colours of the land, I'm sure they were. And Hamish Miller, when he described Mary and Michael, he always describes Mary as Madonna blue, didn't he, as the colour, and Michael as white. And I think they're very Christianised names and terms, obviously, that weren't used in antiquity. But when we divined those colours, going back to the 1990s, Mary had at her centre dominant blue, and Michael would have dominant white. So these earth colours, they flow through the land, they rise up out of the ground. And I was thrilled when a guy called Harry Oldfield got his, earth energy filter, and I was really excited and said, come out and let's have a look if there are dominant colours in the land. And there are. Just where you know that there's a particular colour in the land which is easy to divine. I could show you how to divine colour in seconds. It is so easy because unlike modern day dowsing, you just use a dowsing aid over the earth energy pattern and get the pendulum to choose it for you. It's really simple, and you can use it for water. The colour red is always associated with iron. The colour green is always associated with copper. So you can instantly decode the type of water that you drink and the water beneath the ground through its mineral content. So it was a colourful place, I think, through the eyes of our ancient ancestors, because I think they were a little bit more sensitive than we are today, for instance. And it was Paul Devereux, a researcher into Earth mysteries, that pointed out a very intriguing fact. There was one time in mankind's history when there was a crossover of the senses. Our ancient ancestors, going way back before even the Mesolithic period, the dominant senses were smell and hearing. And some animals still have that today. Now we tend to be more sight and hearing. So when there was a crossover of the rulership of those two senses, you could have heard colour, seen sound, because your senses were crossing over. And I think maybe in the Neolithic period, with the transition from the Mesolithic period, there could have been that sensory perception crossover, and that's how our ancestors experienced something, a completely different sensory experience. And when we look to some other ancient sites that have been fully divined, we see the Neolithic Causeway enclosures that I touched upon yesterday. This is called Knapp Hill. It overlooks a very famous field called Eastfield, which has the first crop circles and pictograms. So a lot of people go there at night, and they say it's a magical place. Strange things happen on Knapp Hill. But we see that this was an earthwork that once crowned the top. It would have appeared chalk white, literally crowning it. And this is where you get a lot of the underground water energy patterns meeting up together from the upper chalk to the lower chalk, and it generates a huge energy field. And in fact, maybe a little bit too high of an energy field to live upon, although these are called, the places where our ancient ancestors lived. In terms of Earth energy, you wouldn't want to live above those energy patterns, but they are labelled camps by archaeologists. And I think that's wrong. And the moon, at these particular times, will send, like I described earlier, this massive tidal force beneath the earth that you can feel. And I'm sure our ancient ancestors could harness it, because this monument, if you get an aerial perspective of it, has what's called like an umbilical cord. It has this strange walkway right the way down the bottom of the hill. But the hill is sheer. You could no way walk down there. It's almost like it's an energy field plugging into the bottom of the landscape. And I would challenge anyone to be able to walk. They call it the Devil's Trackway. It's that difficult to walk. But you notice that with some causewayed enclosures, they have these very strange, deep ditches that enter the ground. And so did the Cursors monument, that big monument above that underground river. Right at the end of it was a very deep ditch going I think it went down about 15 feet into the ground. What were the ancients doing with that monument? And it has such high amounts of energy. But also what the ancient ancestors were interested in, as well as the kind of lunar cycles, was creating a very beautiful visual experience when you went to causewayed enclosures. And one of the visual experiences you can have, because I described it yesterday as being a circular earthwork or an oval earthwork, it would have a ditch and a bank, a gap, a ditch and a bank and a gap, a ditch and a bank and a gap. And each time that you get an equinox or a solstice, the sun would rise above in those gaps there. And so you could actually see a beautiful sunrise. This is probably the oldest solar calendar in the Avebury environs that Busty Taylor and myself discovered. And this is right on the top of a huge underground water source. And like I said yesterday, it was Tim Champion, the archaeologist, that said every single causeway enclosure in northwest Europe, excluding none, were above these meeting points of these aquifers. And like I say, that generates a huge amount of energy. But again, they are labelled places where the living went. And I really don't think so. I've done a kind of bit of a mock-up construction of the outer bank here. This is a Beltane, May the 1st or May the 4th sunrise here. which was integrated into the site. And you can just make out in the foreground, that was the remains of another earthwork that collapsed, because it's really intriguing what happened in about 2500 BC. All the causeways and closures were decommissioned, or, as my late father thought, that the energy system became overloaded. It had like this power burst of energy, and it caused some of the banks to collapse, because archaeologists have noticed that it was a sudden collapse at Robin Hood's Ball. It's almost like an earth energy quake that could have happened in prehistory, to do with these underground waters, and you've got lays carrying even more energy into the site, and it tends to be very active at the times of those 8 sacred festival dates known to our ancient ancestors, like Beltane and Samhain. So the sun plays a role and the moon plays a role, the yin and the yang, the two expressions of the same force. Because to take a Chinese geomant to a site is really amazing, because the first thing that they will do is they kneel to the ground, and they make sure that they wear floppy trousers if they're guys, and they lift their trousers up and they bow to the sacred space, and then they start to feel for the colour and feel for the energy and feel for what the site was used for, and they see it through their geomancer's eyes, because to them, Mary and Michael, Christian, not really into Christian things, to be truthful. And they say, no, Mary, she's meek. I go to a church and I see Mary. I see her holding a baby, which is lovely. I mean, I'm a mum. But they see her as being very meek, and they say, that's not Mary of China. Mary is a lion. She's a tiger. She's a force of nature that can give energy out. But she can be, as well, very mothering. So they said, Mary, I'm not even calling that energy system, Mary and Michael. This is dragon and this is tiger. And tiger is strong at the moment. So they're saying at the moment, with the whole energy sites in England at least, it's the feminine that's coming to power, not like the meek Mary, but to really energize the land. So I find that as an interesting concept, that they just give you a bit of inspiration. And at these certain times of the year, with the solar cycle corresponding closely to it, they do become empowered. And what we notice of the beauty of Windmill Hill, because Windmill Hill is an amazing Neolithic place, to stand on that large round barrow, you can't miss it if you go to Windmill Hill, is where Hamish's, Mary and Michael lines cross. And if you go up there for the summer solstice, there's a madding crowd at Avebury, you will see a beautiful sunrise. The sun will come up on what's called the Hackpen Hill, which means the head of the dragon. And it will sit there momentarily, and then a mist often fills in the valley floor, and the sun's reflection on that is quite beautiful. So that barrow is aligned to the rising sun at midsummer. And it really does feel that the energies become imbued with different colours. And at the midwinter sunset, it will sink into the barrow there. And I love watching the landscape. And Busty and I often go out walking and just stay in, for long periods of time at ancient sites. And we started to notice a long-lost ancestral tradition of the ancient landscape. And that's where the shadow of one barrow can touch another barrow at particular times of the year when they're aligned to it. So, for example, the winter solstice, a dark shadow from one barrow will descend onto another barrow in a long-lost tradition. And it's really great when you kind of interact with these shadows, because you can go from the light to the dark. And it's a really good way of trying to really get to the core of earth energy, because the shadows and the lights, they interplay with the force of the energy. Because tiger, for example, if we see Mary as a really powerful tiger, she quite likes shadow. She becomes even more powerful under the shadow, whereas the dragon, Michael, becomes more imbued with the solar energy and the light. And what Busty and I noticed, which is in our book, Avebury Sun, Moon and Earth Energies, that the two massive portal stones at Avebury as you enter the complex Round about the time of November the 1st, Samhain, ancient Celtic fire festival, the two shadows of the stones co-join and they create a gigantic shadow line that touches the henge bank on the other side. And to cross into the sanctity of the inner stone circles, you have to cross over the shadow line. And I think that's a long lost tradition because there's lots of native traditions which say at particular times of the year, you can think about your life, what you did in that year. Did I do good things? Did I do bad things? Did I achieve this? Didn't I achieve that? What happened in my life in that solar year? And as you walk into the shadow, you release your kind of thought forms that were perhaps not very good or negative, or you think about your achievements, and then you walk back into the light. So you can cross over those points where those two earth energy currents called Mary and Michael flow into the sanctity of the side. And the modern day Druids have now incorporated that rite that we found into their modern day Druid traditions. So for our ancient ancestors, it was about earth energy, yin, yang, light, darkness, and the experience of interacting with all of these different types of energies and scenes about it. It was Terence Meaden that first noticed that the obelisk stone at Avebury, in the centre of the southern inner circle there, created a massive shadow line that would hit other stones at particular times of the year, creating this massive sundial. And what we noticed was that was only half the picture, that in fact, gigantic shadow lines were being cast where on the outer circle, the shadow would fall on the inner circle, and that shadow would fall on that one to the obelisk, and so on, creating this massive light and dark effect at Avebury, like the yin and the yang that you can see before you. And it's really strange at ancient sites. I mean, I don't go down the conspiracy road that often, but either somebody knew where these shadow lines could be seen and experienced because they conveniently have obscured all of this by planting trees in particular places that stop us witnessing this. But you can witness at the winter solstice sunset, one extraordinary shadow line that passes across the road from the outer circle and will hit the obelisk stone. It's just off the obelisk stone because there's a tree in the way, and just at the time of sunset, that would be obscured. And this was a very weak sunset. I mean, that's British weather for you. But in a really, really powerful sunset, you have these massive strips of light against a massive dark shadow. And right at the center of that obelisk stone is a huge geospiral energy pattern that really reacts to that solar force and the turning of the seasons. And Stonehenge incorporated this beautiful shadow line as well, because the station stones, which are they form like a rectangular shape at Stonehenge, they were designed so that at particular times of year, the shadow from one would fall onto another. And they were marked with a ditch around them as well. And these were integrated into Stonehenge. So at these times of the year, it was an indication that you could visually start to see when the earth energies were becoming activated by solar forces as well as lunar forces. So it would be a visual thing that you could experience by interacting with the shadows, which all these station stones above pockets of underground water or pockets of earth current energy. So they're conveniently placed, and then at particular times of the year, you can interact with them, which I'm sure the priesthood did in these places. So for me, water energy, earth energy, is the sacredness, because it's a bit like Kirsty and Phil of location, location, location. It is all about location to our ancient ancestors. If an ancient site isn't first thought about in terms of earth energy, you can put all of the left brain mathematics on top of it. You can put all of the sacred geometry on top of it. But if it doesn't have Gaia's breath of life, if it doesn't have the earth energy there, it will have no spirit of place. And when we go, I'm sure we've been into modern day churches, and it's like just walking into a supermarket. It's dead, it's void, it doesn't have that sacred spirit of place. And that's because it doesn't have the earth energy there. And we mustn't think of earth or water energy as being in the ground. It rises out of the ground, so that when you're photographed, say, with an old-field filter, the earth energy is around your leg area. And the really interesting thing when you start doing filters or using the colour dials of the old French water diviners, an interesting thing happens with your chakra system. It's almost like Mother, we're her children, we're all of Gaia's children. The colours of the earth kind of know where they should go into your body. So if you've got a particular chakra system out of balance, the colours will become more prevalent of the earth energies around particular sides of your body and by your chakra system. So these places were clearly healing environs as well. And anybody with any half an ounce of sensitivity will get moved by an ancient site, even if it's just the awe of how did the stones get here. But it changes you. So I think a lot of healing was done at these ancient sites. Our ancient ancestors did everything with meaning. They would place a stone in a particular location. And for me, looking at an ancient site like Avebury through the eyes of a geomancer, you get to have a beautiful moment, because the stones that are in situ, that have never been moved, never been re-erected by Alexander Keeler, walk down the avenue, there's one stone there, never been touched. All the rest have gone. You've just got Keeler marker stones. They mark areas of huge earth energy and water importance. And it's almost like it has sanctity. Sanctity so precious that even the villagers and the farmers didn't take those stones away. And if you go to that avenue stone and you walk through the avenue way proper, which is on the other side of the stone and not where the tourists walk, so you go to the other side, that you'll notice that there's a ledge on the seat. Yeah? So you can sit down. It's right by the road, unfortunately, because you've got the little road there and it can be quite noisy. But in a quiet moment, sit on that ledge, because what's going on there that we have picked up using equipment is you're being showered in negative ions, which are really, really good for you. And if you divine it with colour, you're going from, again, it's about going from the ordinary into the extraordinary, and you divine the colour, you're right up on what's called ultraviolet. Because as well as with earth energy colours, they're not just the normal spectrum of colours of the rainbow, red through to the violet. You have infra-white, infra-black, ultraviolet. Spiritual gold is generated by particular shapes, like the corbelled roof. So spiritual gold is an alchemy colour, but it's generated by a corbelled roof. The other colours always prevail, and around where you have negative ions, it's always a high chakra colour. So you can go there, you'll experience a healing moment, and what is going on is you're being breathing in all these wonderful negative ions. And right the way down the centre of the West Kennet Avenue, when you go there, animals know what's good for them. And the first thing I got taught in water divining, which I always love to share things, is nature really likes underground water, and plants like underground water. So wherever you get a yew tree in nature that hasn't been planted, that's underground yin water. Wherever you get the oak, evergreen oak, that tends to be underground yang water. And at Avebury's beautiful avenue, you have a huge river, just like the cursors were sited on a river. You have an underground river of what's called aquastatic energy entering that field. And there's specific areas right at the bottom where she splits into 3 sacred underground streams, which in ancient China was the dragon comes into her power. She's splitting into her lunar equivalent, like the 3 phases of the moon. So we decided to do a lot of measurements there to see, what was going on in terms of frequencies that were being emitted and in terms of the energetic quality of that area. And again, it comes out with healing all the time. It will put your brain into a healing moment. So that's going on. And Avebury and these wonderful temple spaces that were put on these really sacred underground waters and earth energy start to resonate at dawn. Just like the birds sing out their dawn chorus, don't they, if we're lucky enough to hear it. I heard it this morning. It was wonderful. The stones have their morning chorus as well in ultrasound, where in these pulse points on the stones that align as well magically, and this was noted by the French diviners, to the cardinal points, north, south, west, and east, they ring out an energetic ultrasound tone, but not into the stone circle, away from the stone circle. So they're pushing their sound and their music and their dawn chorus out into the wider environs and landscape. And it's really very difficult to test the sacred sites now for these types of energies because you have so much e-smog going around. And e-smog is generated with a click-click when you open your car, your mobile phone. And our ancient ancestors chose stones that were really crystallized or had iron in them. It really generates the earth energy even more. And it was a sad moment the other year at the Rollright Stones where we decided to do some tests to see if we could record the ultrasound rather, and see what was going on. And the David Webb, who was conducting the experiments, he just went, oh my God, come and have a look at what's happening. And he was showing me the laptop, and I was like, oh, what's happening? He said, these are signals, these are man-made signals, all being generated now. And I said, well, what kind of signal is it? He said, well, there's two possibilities. Because they're such strong signals emitted by the police force for their communication systems, and by the military for their communication systems as well, he thought they were police and military signals being pushed out by the stones. So I think when we go to an ancient site, we need to take responsibility for our modern day technology and just switch off your phone and just, breathe in the spirit of place, because the more and more e-smog that we're creating, the more and more our stone circles will be picking up on them and pushing that energy back out, and that is not going to be a good thing. But that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to release that energy into the wider landscape. And I think on Tuesday, we're going to the Devil's Den with Megalithomaniacs, as Hugh calls you guys. And this is the Devil's Den here. It's aligned to the setting midsummer sun, and this is a shot of that. It's very beautiful. It's a big dolmen, and dolmens in the ancient world marked massive amounts of underground water. I mean, like a mini sea. Really very, very large. And where you get earth energy currents crossing them, and this is Mary in this landscape here, she swoops into the Devil's Den, and you have lots of carrier lays that can transmit that energy through the landscape. All comes together at the Devil's Den. And if we go there on Tuesday, I'd like to show you how you can divine the underground water, how you can feel it through the different sides of your body if you're into that, or just plain douse it with the dowsing rod. But the dolmen capital of the ancient world was South Korea. That's where you get the biggest amount of dolmens there. And I always call lays kind of carrier lays because to my understanding and how I was shown by European dowsers as well as Chinese dowsers, Qi travels too fast along a straight line. It becomes Sha-Qi, poison arrow, and it's what you don't want. And there was an agricultural scientist in the 1970s who did the biggest report on ley energy that just hasn't been matched to date, which is quite shocking because we're all so familiar with the word ley, but nobody is investing their time, or importantly their money, into a long-term project of what a ley is actually doing. Because according to the scientist's review in his agricultural understanding, he started to grow mustard seeds on leys to see if it would enhance the seed, like we were talking yesterday. John Burke thought if you put them into electromagnetic field on a mound, it would enhance it. It didn't. It created really, really stunted growth on the mustard seeds. And in fact, they wilted after a while. And he was a scientist. He was an agricultural scientist. So he did your control group, etc. He did it in a very scientific manner. So maybe the Chinese were right after all about leys being the conductor and carrier of certain types of energy. They see everything as neutral unless it's applied to task. So to task on some lays is to conduct the high energy, and others are more milder and more beneficial to one's health. Now, according to Guy Underwood, when two forces come together in terms of water, when you get aquastatic water come to meet with normal rainfall water, they're called holy lines. And especially in America, these holy lines were sought out and they were marked as they were in the Nazca Plain. Guy Underwood thought it was some of the lines of the Nazca lines were to do with underground water, and some of the lines were to do with deep underground water. And here is some old surveys of some ancient sites in America that were, according to Guy Underwood, associated with holy lines. This is where the two types of water flow near enough together. And he said the water is so alchemic, this deep underground water, that it can purify the geopathic stress produced by normal underground water, because it's believed that normal underground water, you don't really want to live above it because it creates geopathic stress. But and that's not good for your body. It will break the body down after a while, or the immune system, and make you prone to illnesses in your family and hereditary disorders. But when these two waters come together, they create a sacredness and they create a holiness, because the alchemic female water can imbue the male water with her power, and they're called the holy lines. And in places like Malta, in places like Sardinia and America, this is where you find their integration of ancient sites was to do with the holy lines. Whereas over here, we had a different agenda going on, especially with Stonehenge. We were looking for those reticulated, fast-flowing lines. Not far from this wonderful place, Glastonbury, have the second largest stone circle in the world, called Stanton Drew, which is an amazing place to go and visit. And it's a beautiful reddish hue, full of iron rich, this stone. It can really start to transmit those earth energies. And this was a lovely summer's day where you can get the shadow effect of the light and of the dark that you have earlier at places like Avebury and Stonehenge, interacting with the shadow lines and the energies there. And it's, in a way, it's beautiful, Stanton Drew, because she hasn't had the facelift Avebury's had. Avebury's had a huge facelift by Alexander Keeler to re-erect the stones and to make it look a beautiful site. Stanton Drew is what it is. It's got recumbent stones, and some stones still stand. And it's got a really big circle called a Great Circle. Then it's got a smaller lunar circle and another smaller circle towards the northeast, I think, which has 8 stones. And this is one of the 8 stone rings here. And I went there with the 2 Chinese guys to try and understand Stanton Drew, because what's Stanton Drew about in terms of energy, and to get some inspiration to try and understand the site a bit more. And he looked at these stones and said, "There's a square stone. Where's the square stone?" I said, "A square stone? At Stanton Drew, are you sure about that? We've got to find a square stone." So we walked and walked and walked, and we found the square stone. It's a recumbent stone. And I was saying yesterday about the magical squares of antiquity. In Stanton Drew, you have what's called, engineered by ancient man on the inside to harness particular types of energy, a huge Venus square. And when you have these encoded into a stone circle or any ancient site, they will show you that in a square form. So if you walk around the Great Circle, you will see that encoded into the square stone. It's been worked to make it look like a beautiful square. So when we go to places like Stanton Drew, they have the earth energy, and then all the maths and sacred geometry comes much, much after that. But it's great to experience weird things at stone circles. I mean, I love the quirky, I love hearing strange things. And if you go to Rollright, because Rollright is such a magical place, it's actually my favourite stone circle, because all the weird stuff I've ever experienced has been at Rollright. And it's you know, it's a place, you know, it's not for a wussy type of person, because it's dark and light entwined. It's neutral. It's what you do with those energies is your magic. And, you know, you do have some darkness about Rollright, and it was notorious that Black Sabbath went there and did their spooky little stuff with good old Ozzy Osbourne. But it's a place where you can hear things today. So the full moon we were talking about makes a place become active and magical. Then if you go to the Whispering Nights, it's got a ugly Victorian railing around it now, but go there at the full moon and go round to the kind of, as you approach it, if you go to the left-hand side, and wait for, just plan when the moon's going to rise up. It's normally in the evening, isn't it, around sort of 6 at particular times of the year, and you go there, the stones start making these amazing clicking sounds. And they will go click, 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 click. And as you walk around the stones, if you go 360 degrees around the stone railings, you'll realise that the sound carries from one side to the other. Well, I always thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to feel sound? And when these stones start clicking, just to put your hands and your body towards it to see what happens. And you can really feel, if you push your hand through the railing, you can get in probably to about there by pushing your hand in. You feel a force field being generated by the sound. And when we get those beautiful rare moons that are called the supermoon, aren't they? And they're really big in the sky. What we see come alive at places like Rollright, and this was a super moon, this is when the whole site really does come into its focal power and glory. At these places, at these times of the year, it's where the circle aligns to the heavens above, to the earth energies in the ground, and imbues the site with a real special force. And that force, again, in most ancient traditions to do with water divining, is neutral. It isn't male, it isn't female, it's what you want your magic to be born of that. And these principles were integrated into most stately homes, the European Commission buildings, for example, and they're being integrated now into building programs and into other forms as well. Because there was a competition last year on building a museum in Helsinki. And they wanted to build it in a different way, and it was all teams. It was all going to be a part of a documentary. And one team of some drop-dead gorgeous guys from London, they were architects, said, what we want, Maria, from you, we want you to get you involved, so you interpret the landscape so that we can site the world's biggest museum into a place that's going to imbue with earth energy. We can get someone to do all the maths and put all the sacred geometry on it. We're going to get a line to signal. We're going to have it look like a swan's head, and it's going to light up at night like a celestial swan. I thought, how magical is that? That is amazing. And that's where earth energy is going now. It's going out there to the masses, and it's going to be integrated into lots of different corporate buildings, because we need to catch up in terms of how we live to how the gentry live, because they've been living in harmony with the earth for many, many years. It's us that hasn't. And that's my presentation.